morning, I'm David Nash. This is the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee meeting for March 9th, 2023. I'm going to start with a roll call. I'm here. Lance Crawford is absent. David Bartholomew.
Here.
Jamie Benshaw.
Here.
Sarah Copley. Elvia Diaz. Rick Freeman is out of town. Claire Hubbard. Tricia Killian. Marcus Laws.
Present.
Dustin Mailman. Tim McEllier.
Here.
Celeste Ordway is absent. Joelle Steininger is absent. Jennifer Teague.
Present.
Councilmember Roney is here. Thank you. And the staff are all here. So we'll skip the minutes for the moment. And we're meeting at this point for discussion. We don't have a quorum. We need one more member to make a quorum. So we won't take any votes at this time. But I guess if anybody has any comments about the minutes.
I do. The minutes are thorough. They don't include a conversation about unpaid staff that committee brought up at the last meeting. So the minutes are not complete, at least to that point.
And unpaid staff, you're referring to members of the committee who are not paid to be here because they're employed elsewhere. Is that what you're saying? And also participation.
Whether or not they're employed anywhere is
Yeah.
not basis for being paid to be here. Committee brought up a point to pay unpaid staff on the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, and that was addressed and needs to continue to be addressed.
Okay, well, we'll add a comment to the minutes related to the request for people with lived experience in particular to receive some compensation for their participation in our activities.
Yeah, in the last meeting, I did deliver a question from a group of county commissioners and city council members asking if there was a recommendation from this group for people to be compensated as subject matter experts with lived experience. I did not hear a formal recommendation with a vote. What I did see was a general support with some questions that are important questions to ask about the process. So I would love to see if there could be a formal recommendation, and I'm sure I'm not alone, but we do need to make sure that the questions were asked for what the application process looks like, as some members may not apply for compensation.
Sure. All right, do we want to add it to the agenda for today to have a vote? I think it would be to ask staff to research ways that people with lived experience could be compensated.
Yes.
Okay. So,
I'm sorry. I believe you'll need to, you could certainly have the discussion today, and then I believe we'll need to add it to the April agenda for the actual vote, but staff could bring a proposal back to the April meeting, and we can workshop that with you all between now and then you could vote to make that recommendation in April.
Absolutely.
okay. All right, well, Dustin is here, so we have a quorum. So do we have a motion related to the minutes? I'm happy to ask the staff to add a comment that was discussed at the last meeting. Does anybody have a motion? I guess we have a motion from Elvia to amend the minutes to say that. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from all in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I'll move to approve the amended minutes.
And I'll second.
Dustin seconded. David made the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. All right, thanks a lot. Everybody, remember again to pull your mics down and talk into them when you're speaking, just partly for the room, but also for the live feed. Emily, I'll turn it over to you for Homeless Strategy Division updates.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to I want to let you all know what we're doing as staff as we go forward, and wanted to just give you sort of an update, especially as we have new staff on our team, as you know. So we have been doing some work in our division to really sort of anchor in the role of our division and what, again, since we have three out of 4 are new folks on our team, really getting clear on what those roles are for people. So we have recently had a staff retreat, and I just wanted to share some info with you all about where we're at. Okay, great. So again, as we have a new division here in the Community and Economic Development Department, Homeless Strategy Division, some of what we have been looking at is how we can better coordinate with other systems of care in our community. So we, as you all are working and as our community is working to really develop the homeless service system, we know that a lot of folks who are homeless are also interacting with other systems in our community like behavioral health and criminal justice and healthcare. And so we want to be sure that we're identifying opportunities to sync up that system's work across the community. We're participating, staff are participating in the Behavioral Health Justice Collaborative, which is a group run by the county looking at the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice. We also have been meeting with shelter and housing leaders in the community. Many of you all are part of that group, and recently we had a meeting with staff from Mission Hospital, including Tricia Killian, to talk about where there are opportunities to better coordinate around discharge and shelter entry so that we don't have disconnects in those systems. And then our team also recently went on a jail tour, which was really illuminating and really highlighted many, many opportunities that we have for increased coordination with some of those systems in our community. We also have been doing a lot of peer learning, looking at how other continuum of care are operating across the country. So we participated in the shelter site visits in Raleigh and have also had calls with the continuum of care leadership in Orange County, which is Chapel Hill, Scarborough, Mecklenburg County, and Savannah, and then are also participating in the statewide local leadership response. Again, just trying to understand what is working well in other communities that we can replicate here. And then we also want to be supporting additional resources in our community. It takes money to do all of this work that everyone is doing, and so want to be sure that we're a good voice for marshaling those resources. You all were invited to participate in the Home ARP process, which is federal funding as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. That the decisions around that's about $4 million for our 4-county consortium area, but that funding is dedicated to folks who are exiting homelessness. And currently, the allocation plan for that has been drafted and reviewed by the Home Consortium. That'll be in front of council soon, and will be submitted to HUD by the March 31st deadline. Following HUD's approval, there will be an application process or award process to determine how those dollars will actually be used. But all of that is underway, again, to bring about $4 million to the 4-county consortium area for homelessness. And then lastly, we heard from the Alliance that we have some work to do in our community around better coordination with how resources are allocated to support homeless and housing programs. And so they are connecting us with Funders Together, Ending Homelessness, I believe, Funders Together to End Homelessness, which is a national organization that supports funder collaboratives at the local level to respond to homelessness in a more effective way. So I think we have some learning to do about how that looks in other communities and what kind of opportunities we might have here. As you know, funding from the Continuum of Care and the Emergency Solutions Grant programs the decisions for those dollars are funneled through this group. But we have many, many other funding sources in our community that are supporting homeless services And so some of our opportunity is to look at how that can be better coordinated so that we can have a bigger impact. So learning what that looks like at the national level and in other communities. Also, certainly interrupt me if you have questions at any point. So as I said, we had a division retreat recently, and I wanted to, part of what we did in that retreat is talk about values and culture for our team, our little 4-person team. But I wanted to share those with you all to say this is how, how we intend to work together, and also how we want to approach our work with you. We know that our role is to support you as you provide leadership in our community around ending homelessness. And so these are the values and the culture that we want to bring as we're working with you. I also know that as the governance work group, and we'll hear more about that in a bit, as the governance work group is moving forward, in some communities in their continuum of care governance charter, they include values and vision and mission, and all of those are really important things for us to be thinking about as we transition how we work together in our community around homelessness. So just wanted you to see how our staff team is approaching our work and how we want to be working with you. Also, at our staff retreat, we talked about work plans for the rest of the current fiscal year. So that's only another few months, but wanting to be really clear about what we want to accomplish in that time period. You all know our team. They're sitting right over here. So Charles is our data and compliance specialist. His focus is on HMIS, as you know, and really on developing our community's implementation of that system. So that we have an improvement in the quality of our data, and so that we are maintaining compliance with federal regulations around that. He is working with agencies that participate in HMIS on annual audits to be sure that we are that we have some consistency in our application of HMIS across the community, and that we are compliant with the federal requirements. Also working to expand HMIS participation, improve data quality, and we'll be working on plans for data sharing. That is a large project, and we will be back with you all, I imagine, multiple times to talk through how that might work in our community, but we know that's an important piece to get in place, and so Charles is putting some time in on that. Debbie is our training and development specialist, and has a heavy focus right now on coordinated entry, and coordinated entry is just a bear. It's complicated. We have a work group going, and again, we'll hear more about that in a bit, but Debbie is really building our sort of staff expertise on how coordinated entry is working effectively elsewhere, and what those elements are and requirements are, so that she can best support that work group. She's also... Yeah.
Emily, I was really surprised by the definition of coordinated entry. Can you speak to that, to clarify that a little bit?
Sort of, but yes, so the concept of coordinated entry is that that rather than it being sort of a maze and a jumble for people to get the resource they need that will resolve their homelessness, instead of that, the idea is that we develop a coordinated system that's easy for people to access, so that they can quickly get the resource that they need without having to magically knock on the right door or navigate a super complicated system. So the concept is that you pool all of the people who need housing resources, you pool all of your housing resources, and then you have a really clear and transparent process for how people are able to access those. In some communities, coordinated entry can also include homelessness prevention and diversion, so helping people resolve their housing crisis really quickly before they need to enter the homeless service system. I think it's possible to incorporate shelter entry into a coordinated entry system. In our community, coordinated entry has been a federal requirement since 2014, and in our community, we have really focused that on entry into housing programs, and that piece needs attention right now. And also there is opportunity to look at expanding that out. And again, we have a work group, and we'll hear an update from that work group in a bit. Did that answer it?
So coordinated
Can you talk into the
entry,
mic?
is entering into housing. It is not entering into homelessness.
That's currently true.
Yes.
In Asheville.
So Debbie is also focused on training, and again, you all will hear more about that as we go along, is really serving as our expert on housing resources in our community and also on youth homelessness. She is going to be doing some work on mapping housing resources and training. Again, it's really complicated for service providers. Also, it's really complicated to know what the full landscape of housing resources are in our community. She's going to be doing some mapping around that and providing some training. Looking at shared housing, which is, we heard a recommendation from the Alliance about implementing a shared housing initiative, I believe within 12 months. Shared housing is an important strategy and a complicated strategy, and needs, it's tough to have roommates, and also roommates are an effective way to make housing affordable for all of us at some point in our lives, and so a strategy that we have some opportunity to build out, I think, in our community. Great. And then Catherine is our integrated health and housing specialist. So her focus is on coordinating with other systems of care, and also looking at the opioid settlement funding that the city is receiving and making sure that we're coordinating really closely with the county. The county is receiving, I would estimate, about 10 times the amount of funding that the city is receiving through those settlements. And so we want to be sure that we are synced up with the county's efforts. I know there's been some council discussion recently about how we can do that. So much more to come on that front, but Catherine is our staff lead on that. And is also looking at how to create some resources for service providers, again, so that homeless service providers are able to better coordinate with behavioral healthcare, other providers in a way that is more streamlined and just easier to access. All right, lastly for us, Charles submitted the system performance measures February 28th. That is one of the 4 annual reports that we provide to the federal government. And I had said last month that we hope to present that information to you all this month. We didn't quite have enough of a window between the submission deadline and the need to publish meeting materials, and so we will look to do that at the April meeting. But that has been submitted. And then point-in-time count reporting is underway, and you all may recall from last year that the process is that HUD opens the homelessness data exchange, and we submit the data through that website that's not yet open for submission, and they've not yet announced a deadline for the point-in-time submission. Based on the past, I would guess that will be late April or May, and we are hoping to be able to share results with you all in April. Hold that tentatively, but that is our hope. And then lastly, the housing inventory count is also underway, and that is another federal report that pairs with the point-in-time count. So housing inventory count is looking at, on the same night as the point-in-time count, when we had X number of people who were experiencing homelessness, and some of whom were unsheltered, how many beds were available in our community, and what type of beds were they? Were they emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent housing, and what population were they dedicated to? And then of those, how many beds were utilized and how many beds were open on the same night as the point-in-time count. So all of that is being compiled right now, and again, we'll present that to you all and also submit that to HUD by the deadline.
Is that going to include possibly any land that is available for use?
It doesn't. It's really specific. It's federal requirements about what we report, and it's really specifically looking at beds that already exist.
Can we still extract that data, though?
Tell me more.
So in other cities, we have like a lot of plots of land, including, so when we do, let's say the city at the end of the year has a ton of property, right? Even unpaid property for taxes. We know what those properties are. So we know what we have to use for, let's say, building. So we know even if we decide that we can build, let's just say 60 houses, and then by the end of that, people have paid their taxes, so we can only build 40. We know what we have to use or what we can work with. So it's an idea of how we, or what we can and can't do. So if the city is sitting on property, then let's use those properties. So I want to know what the city is sitting on.
In general, related to affordable housing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can put that request in. This particular report is just shelter beds. But I think
Understood,
that's a
but
good-
the NC 501 says, you know, I treat it like archery. It says, number 1 says to be bold, 2 says to create, and 3 says to build. And build not in the sense of just building something, but to build on what is already there. So we're not just following Spokane or any other city, we're Asheville. We want people to build off of us too. So, and then to focus on our goals. So, so that's what I'm trying to do. So I want to see what we have to work with in general. So those are my bold ideas.
Okay, I have a question for clarity. I heard you mention city property. Because this is under the city, but also as members appointed by the county, would you include the county in your thinking also?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Let's run that request up the
Those
ladder.
maps exist, there's already a list of vacancy properties. I've seen them, it's been a while, but I'm sure we can.
Any other questions for Emily or comments? All right, we started late, so I'm going to try and catch us up a little bit. On the old business, we have 2 items. One is a request process that staff have put together for letters of support from the Continuum of Care. This has been kind of loosey-goosey in the past, and I appreciate staff wanting to set up a system so that we will all have input and actually vote on those letters of support. So that was in your packets. I don't know if it requires a lot of discussion, but are there any questions around that?
I'll just add that this is follow-up to last month's meeting where we looked at what elements should be included. So this is just approval of the form that was developed based on that conversation. So no additional content here. This is just the actual form.
So if you're an agency and you're applying for funding and you need a letter of support from the Continuum of Care, access this form. Staff will bring it to us at our next meeting, and that's when a decision will be made. So can I have a motion on that?
Done. Motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Marcus and Dustin. Any discussion?
I was just looking at some of the forms that have come through, and I concur with a lot of what has been said. One, to not do anything in haste, but to have more time to look at them and to be able to ask questions. I think there are a lot of things on those forms that need to be answered. I think that it is more of a statement to say how much, figuratively and monetarily those things actually cost and how much agencies are looking for to do the work that they want to do.
Jamie?
Can I get an example of the timeline if we're going to wait and vote at a meeting?
Yes, so this form is what we will publish on the city's website, and we will share this out with partner agencies so that folks have a heads up. So we are recommending that agencies would submit those requests via the form to our division by the first Thursday of the month, and that would give you all a week to review the form. We would include that in your meeting materials, but that would give you a week to review prior to a vote at your meeting on the second Thursday of the month.
I wondered whether or not it might not be appropriate to invite applicants to come. Sometimes I think, to Elvia's point, there may be questions that this board has of the applicant. Whether or not it be required, I don't know, but have that as an offering, because it felt like there have been times where we've had additional questions based on the information that's been provided.
Sure, and my statement about the monetary amount is that you might not like what you get because of the way you presented yourself. So if there's a better question in cases where something is like, wow, that sounds great, but, you know, there was something that sounded better, but, there's a lot of, sometimes things are semantically incorrect or verbally just not cohesive. So, cogent.
Okay. We can add an encouragement in here for people to attend the meeting. Everybody okay with that? Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. The second item, we approved community values last month with some edits on the fly. So these are incorporating the edits into what we've already approved. So if you can scroll down to the data piece. There it is. One back up. So this is the language that we discussed and is proposed to be included in the maintain fidelity to data and evidence. Data will guide all decisions in program funding, policy, and system design changes. As part of this commitment, the COC will employ quality services which reflect the COC community values. To promote quality services, the COC will provide training in evidence-based approaches, including housing first, trauma-informed care, and harm reduction across the service delivery system. That's one change. And then the next change is on the next page. Addition about equity, the COC will promote diversity, equity, and inclusion of BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and disabled populations by creating an environment that allows all who have been left behind to participate and contribute fully. Additionally, equity will be reflected in all decisions, especially those involving funding, access, and delivery of services. Do we have a motion on approving these? Elvia made a motion to approve. Remember to put your mic down.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I'll second.
Marcus seconded. Do we have any discussion?
Not to talk just about the language, but I'm just wondering about the phrase of being left behind, if maybe that could be changed to marginalized. To me, marginalized starts to speak more to the systemic impact of what is occurring to BIPOC, LGBTQ, and disabled populations.
Are you making a motion?
More for discussion and conversation before the motion.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I think marginalized is a good word. I'm also wondering about a word like disinherited, to where it's not just that folks aren't getting their needs met, but that they're being cut off completely at this point.
We were talking about people experiencing homelessness. Should we just say that instead of sort of words around that? Jamie?
For those of you who came to the breakfast with Asheville Council on Safety or read those comments, there is a pushback for housing first. And I don't know if there would be any discussion around that. Is housing first a HUD policy?
Housing First is a HUD policy and it's a local policy. Can we park that question for a while because it is a fairly large discussion. And I don't think that Housing First in particular is an equity focused item. But
Well,
maybe it is.
with the Housing First conversation, as the National Alliance to End Homelessness defined it and continued to define it, was that it's not about permanent housing first. It's about sheltering and roof over someone's head first, and that's part of a kind of spectrum of care. And I think that is missing from the narrative of what housing first actually is widespread.
We have a motion and a second on this language. Any other comments?
Yeah, I am wondering if we could scroll up a little bit where we're talking about housing first and trauma-informed care and harm reduction. I'm wondering if there's potential to add culturally appropriate or culturally contextual care. That seems to be a part of what we're talking about here next, but when we're discussing the disproportionate number of people of color who are affected by homelessness, if the cultural competency piece is left out, we're missing a massive bulk of who we're aiming to serve.
I would agree with that statement about adding the culturally competent as well. Would you like me to restate that? I would agree.
All right, let's back up. Hold the motion for approval. Do we have any motions to amend this language and be very specific about where you're making it, so we don't have to bring it back and vote on it again next month? Yes, sir.
David,
Yeah,
since
so
we
sorry,
have
yeah.
a motion
Yeah.
and a second, do we have to vote on that before we start?
I think
with-
we need to take any amendments into consideration first.
Yeah,
I'm just going to park that motion for a second.
So motion to amend?
Yeah.
So where I was pointing specifically was to this last sentence of the maintain fidelity to data and evidence. That in addition to housing first, trauma-informed care, and harm reduction, that we might add cultural competency or culturally appropriate as language I've also seen in our community.
Okay, so it will read trauma-informed care, comma, cultural competency, comma, and harm reduction.
Yes, that's what I'm hoping
That's
to
one
offer.
motion.
Yeah.
Second on that?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, do we have another amendment?
Yes, my amendment would be to change "been left behind" to "marginalized community," to all who have been marginalized to participate and contribute fully.
All who have been marginalized. Do we have a second on that?
Do we want to say marginalized economically?
I think marginalized, I mean, I have a comment about it, but do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion. Personally, I think all who have been marginalized is sort of technocratic language and doesn't really focus on our mission and our focus on homelessness. So I'm not in favor of that language, but I will leave that up to the group.
What's the word to change, disinherited?
Disinherited was a word that I used. I'm also wondering if, because in other capacities we use this language of justice impacted or impacted by homelessness, something that communicates the intersectionality of diversity, equity, and inclusion and homelessness is what I hope we could aim for.
Yeah, and my goal is just to identify any word that identifies the systemic issues that exist with continuing to perpetuate homelessness within certain communities. So whatever word gets us there, I'm just a little afraid that left behind doesn't target specifically the systemic issues that exist within practice and policy.
Yeah. What about systemically impacted by homelessness?
Open to that suggestion as well.
Yeah. systemically impacted by homelessness rather than left behind.
That allows all who have been systemically impacted by homelessness to participate and contribute fully. Is that the language you're proposing?
Are you,
Yeah.
It sounds
This
to
is
me
for
like-
discussion, not a recommendation. Yeah.
it sounds like part of what you're identifying is that systemic impacts have contributed to homelessness
Yes.
rather than homelessness being the systemic impact? Is that
Yes.
true? Or
Yes.
Okay, so some specific language then? Yes.
My homelessness was the result of economics, poor choices, as well as what you were saying about the system. I really like the idea of including that language in there because it is a significant impact. Marginalized doesn't cover it.
Other discussion? Are we ready to vote on the language that was proposed, which is marginalized?
Can we revise the amendment, or does the amendment have to be voted on?
You can revise it, you made the motion.
I'm happy to revise it, but I still think we need to identify specifically what that is. And I think there was a question, just based off what Dustin said, with the clarification that Emily had. Do you mind to state yours one more time?
Yeah, those who have been systemically impacted by homelessness.
No, when Emily asked the question, so we're not looking for people who've been systemically impacted by homelessness. We're looking for people who have experienced homelessness because of systemic racism and other issues in our community.
Disenfranchised?
But as we look at what proceeds in this sentence, it is saying that having the LGBTQIA identity and being a person of color and these issues of diversity and equity, that this has systemically impacted their kind of spiral into homelessness. So this is where my language is coming from, is all of these populations that we've listed are systemically more impacted by homelessness than folks who are not. So we're hoping to center those voices is what I'm seeing here.
And I think that message is here already.
If I might, just a reminder that in the last meeting, we also talked about our disabled neighbors.
It's on here.
I believe LV has said disenfranchised. I also feel like that starts to speak to the system issues at present. I don't know how the group feels about that language, who have been disenfranchised, participate.
Allows all who have been disenfranchised to participate and contribute fully. Do you want to amend your motion?
I amend my motion.
Dustin, is that okay with you? Second, as the person who seconded the motion?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
I can second that.
All right, any further discussion? So without coming back for another vote next month, we're going to change the words left behind to disenfranchised in this item. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. So we have a motion do we have a motion to approve as amended? For the policy, for the,
Motion to approve.
Elvia made a motion, second.
I'll second.
Tim seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
I want to take a moment and say thank you to the staff for working on the language and hearing the conversation from the last month in developing what we saw today.
Great. So we have Mr. Bates. Great. I just want to introduce Kevin Bates from the Swananoa Value Christian Ministry for a brief presentation. He represents an important shelter that we often don't think about in our broader system, but welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. So I want to thank each of you for letting me have this opportunity to be here with you all today. As it was mentioned, my name is Kevin Bates. I am the Executive Director of Swannanoa Valley Christian Ministry. Swannanoa Valley Christian Ministry, or SVCM as we call it, is a team of committed staff, volunteers, churches, and community partners working together to meet the crisis needs of our neighbors, both housed and unhoused, in the Swannanoa Valley. While this often takes the form of food and clothing or direct financial assistance for rent, for heating, for medical or water bills, one of the most important things we can do for our neighbors is to offer a compassionate presence and a listening ear. Poverty, as we know, is all incredibly complex, it's emotionally draining, and it's often dominated by a narrative of shame. Our hope is to begin to push back against that narrative of shame by communicating dignity and sacred worth to all of our neighbors. And as we help them navigate the complex realities and systems of poverty to meet their immediate and critical need. Admittedly, we fall very short of those lofty goals, but as I always talk about, even in something like marriage, as long as we're striving together, it's a good thing. So we strive in that direction. Just yesterday, a volunteer of ours told me a story about a neighbor that we had a chance to meet at our ministry. This volunteer works as one of our intake counselors who greets the neighbors when they come in, spends time in conversation with our neighbors, and the purpose of that intake counselor is to create a space for the neighbor to share their story, to be able to open up a little bit about what might be some of their most pressing needs, and to help identify where we as a ministry might be able to help, or how we might help direct them or navigate them towards next best steps. The volunteer recounted the story that this neighbor came in a few weeks ago, and then a few weeks later, he happened to be out in the community and he saw this neighbor. And in a moment that could have been filled with avoidance, with shame, instead became this beautiful moment where the neighbor came to him and embraced him and said, "Thank you. I remember you. I saw you, and you saw me." I'm grateful for stories like this that remind us what we're doing. Each year, thousands of our neighbors in the Swannanoa Valley come to our ministry to meet their crisis needs. Last year, we were able to help 899 households, representing 1,958 people with assistance with food, clothing, direct financial support. We distributed over 143,000 pounds of food. We provided over $100,000 to pay for direct heating assistance, keeping people warm during the winter. We were able to help 121 families stay in their homes by providing rental assistance, which we know is an incredible issue in this area. All told, we were able to donate or to distribute $300,000 of direct financial assistance to our neighbors in the community. And so much of this is because of our wonderful volunteers, staff, churches, and community partners. But beyond crisis needs, we also strive to dig deeper into relationships with one another. And we have a program called Hope for Tomorrow, which houses currently unhoused single mothers with children in 8 apartments. It's temporary transitional housing for 18 months where they receive case management, financial, emotional, vocational support. It's a beautiful relational work, and I believe that God shows up in that work. And so I tell my volunteers and my churches that the real test of what we're doing is not that we show God to the world, we are a Christian ministry, but instead that we learn to see God in one another. We must learn that every person we meet, no matter how different they may be from us in our backgrounds, our ethnicity, our race, our religion, our life experience, every neighbor we meet is someone overflowing with sacred worth, someone worth getting to know, and a friend waiting to be made. Nearly every day I say to someone at the ministry, let us give extravagantly to the point where someone will accuse us of being wasteful. Why? Because people are that beautiful. People are that wonderful. They're that full of dignity, that full of respect, that full of beautiful compassion. And this is why we exist at Swannanoa Valley Christian Ministry. We're here because our neighbors are beautiful, wonderful people, all of them, housed, unhoused, and everywhere in between. They are our friends, or hopefully at least we're earning the right to be called among their friends. And as I tell my 4-year-old daughter, when we have a friend who's in need, we help them. And so here we are, and I'm thankful to join in your work and this larger work of this continuum of care. And I pray that we will grow together in our work to meet the growing needs of our neighbors until strangers become friends. So thank you.
Any questions?
I just have a comment.
Yes.
When I was homeless and living on the street, there was a Code Purple shelter at a church in Black Mountain and free bus rides there. And Swananoa Christian Ministries is who directed me there. And I got good food and a warm night's sleep.
I'm so grateful to hear that.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say thanks to you for being here. Debbie connected with Kevin about the point in time count because the transitional housing program that he mentioned, as you know, the continuum of care geography is all of Buncombe County, and so that certainly includes the work that Swananoa Valley Christian Ministry is doing. Historically, we've not always had a very close working relationship, but we want to change that. We want to be sure that we are inclusive of our entire continuum of care, and so I appreciate you being willing to be here today, and I'm hoping that we can really integrate the work that's happening across our continuum of care, so that we're not only focused on what's happening in Asheville, but really looking at the community as a whole.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for that because, as I mentioned, it's truly our friends that we're meeting outside, seeing what they're going through. They're coming to us each day, and I want to continue to integrate how we can care and love our neighbors in our area with what we're doing as a whole county. So thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
To continue on that note, it's been one of my things to notice that Mount Mitchell here is the highest point on the East Coast. And if there were a beacon to be lit, it is here for all to see so that we see each other in crisis, so that we know that there is a crisis. So, yeah, connecting even our counties and cities together is what we should be doing. There are people at the bottom of Mount Mitchell who have never seen the top. And to me, that's unfathomable. So, yes, connecting is wonderful, and thank you for being here.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. All right, I failed miserably in catching us up. But we have a 10:30 hard stop today. I see a lot of folks in the audience, and I assume that there may be some public comments, so we're gonna reserve some time for that. At 10:20, wherever we are with the discussion at that point, we'll stop and see if there's public comment. Does that seem? Can I ask if anybody in the audience wants to make a public comment? Not right now, but if you can raise your hand if you hope to make one. We have one here. Anybody else want to comment when we get to it? All right, so it may not be quite two people. It may not be quite as urgent. So, but we'll park our discussion wherever it is at 10:20, have the public comment, and reconvene with any further discussion next month. So for the work groups, just to get my part of it out of the way, and then I'll turn it over, we do have a request for the work group chairs to submit a written report every month. I know that I'm asking a lot, but if that's possible, to do a half-page or one-page report saying where you are with the process, so that it can go out with the agenda items. So it'll need to be done by the Friday before our next meeting in April. And with that request and a nod from everybody, I think.
I just wonder, is there any possibility for city staff to assist in that since they are represented on each of the committees? Or if you're asking specifically that be the additional role of the board members?
I think I'm asking for it to be the committee chair, but certainly they can request assistance from the staff. All right, so we'll turn it over to Marcus for the update on the coordinated entry work group.
All right. So coordinated entry, we have met 2 times. Most recently was it Tuesday? And the group changed from the first meeting to the second meeting, but both meetings were, I felt were really great. We've already had some strong conversation around what coordinated entry is, what it means, and what it should be looking like for Asheville, Buncombe County. I think part of the strong conversation that really came up began around the core elements of coordinated entry. So we have been focusing on access, assessment, prioritization, and referral, with our primary conversation beginning around access. Our focus with access being what are our entry points within the continuum of care, meaning what agencies are currently participating in HMIS, as well as what resources do we have in the community that we would look towards having been a part of that coordinated entry system. So when we get to a point of prioritization and referral, we actually have a final product so we can direct people in the correct manner to housing resources that actually match their needs. So what we will be looking at the upcoming meeting will be those access points for individual organizations that participate in HMIS, as well as how do we dole that information out, and what peripheral agencies should we be working with, not only to have them understand what coordinated entry is so they can make appropriate referrals to coordinated entry sites, but also that we understand once we get to those coordinated entry sites what the expectations will be, what requirements will be had, and then we'll be able to build out a robust system for referrals.
So, are there any questions, or does anybody, this would be a good time to ask. We had some questions earlier about what coordinated entry is, if there's any other discussion about it. And then I would ask Marcus, if not, I would ask Marcus if there are any gaps that you see in your process, or people that you need to include to help make your work group more effective.
Is it your goal for everybody to be using, is it your goal for everybody to be using the HMIS system and to be recruiting in order to, to do so? I mean,
We would like for as many folks as possible to use the HMIS system because it gives us a better access to resources when it comes to coordinated entry. The idea being for someone that's coming through the door, we want to understand what their particular barriers to housing may be. And then as we work with those individuals, we can identify housing resources that actually matches their needs. So if it is a person that presents from LGBTQ community, we want to match them with a housing resource that supports their status within the community.
so this is an agency level as well?
Yes.
So you're reaching out to agencies as well as individuals?
Yes.
One of the challenges that I saw was a father with children finding access. There's a lot with mothers with children. Any discussion along how to provide access for that type of family?
I think that discussion has not been had yet, but it will be a discussion. I think, like David said, looking at gaps, those are the things that we need to be assessed, that we have to assess, like what resources do we already have in the community that can be utilized as a resource for coordinated entry? And then as we identify those gaps, are there agencies within the continuum of care that we can actually tap to utilize and bring into the fold, or is that going to be a system gap that we need to work collectively to be able to address those concerns?
Thank you. Any other suggestions, comments? All right, Jen, I'll turn it over to you for governance.
The governance committee has met one time. We have another meeting scheduled for next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. The first committee meeting was talking about how we wanted to review the charters and which charters we wanted to review. So the committee decided that they would review the charters from the 3 that were recommended from the Alliance. So Spokane, Houston, and San Diego. And the committee's members broke up into smaller groups, and there's 3 people reviewing Spokane, 2 people reviewing Houston, and 1 person that's reviewing San Diego. Emily and one of the committee members met to develop like a quick PowerPoint slide presentation, and each of those groups are supposed to be entering content that they found from the charters of the 3 COCs that they reviewed. And that way we're getting the same consistent information from each of those communities. So like, how do they determine membership? What does membership look like in their community? Who's the lead agency? Who's the collaborative applicant, et cetera. At the Tuesday meeting, we'll be looking at those PowerPoint slides, and then from there we'll be determining the next steps. We decided we would meet twice a month, and so right now we do not have the next meeting scheduled after next Tuesday, but at next Tuesday's meeting, we will determine the next meeting. We did not schedule a time frame for when we hope to have our work accomplished, but ideally we'd like to shoot for sometime around the 1st of July to be in alignment with the fiscal year, but there's no guarantee that the charter will come out then for consideration, but we are working to develop a governance charter that fits our COC here in Asheville, Buncombe County, but that is in alignment with some of the best practices we've seen across the country. As far as if we need additional members, we encourage people, if you're interested in the governance committee, to reach out. You can reach out to me. But I feel like we are very fortunate to have representation. We have county representation. We have staff from the city, so we appreciate that. We do have a person with lived experience. And then we also have the community association, the neighborhood association participating as well.
Thanks. Questions for Jen?
Is there a timeline to have a new draft of bylaws?
Ideally, we'd have something like by the end of June is our hope. We haven't formalized that or confirmed that. There's some conversation about maybe wanting to talk with some of the COCs that we're looking at. So I think after we see how different the COCs are that we're looking at, those 3 that I mentioned, that'll help to guide really what a time frame may look like for developing a document.
Good. What were the governance models that you were, or where were they located geographically again?
So we discussed whether or not we wanted to add any additional governance COCs outside of the ones that the Alliance recommended, but the committee decided to focus on the 3 that the Alliance submitted. So Spokane, Washington, Houston, Texas, and San Diego, California.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? How do we feel about that timeline? Could I request that we have a draft for circulation with the HIAC at our June meeting?
I will ask the committee next week, and we will do our best.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, all right. Outreach and encampment. Dave.
Yeah, so we were able to meet earlier this week. The meeting was mostly getting to know each other, setting up a meeting schedule, and making some plans. We will be meeting on a weekly basis, Mondays at 4 for 1 hour from now until May. We have a goal of producing a proposed or recommended encampment policy to bring to HIAC by May. So right now, the immediate work plan was just to look at some of the recommended encampment policies, everyone read them, think about how they might work in Asheville, bring other encampment policies and things, send those out to the group, and maybe talk about those on Monday or perhaps bring them back. But that's our first goal, of course, with outreach. That's a goal we don't want to let time pass on either. So part of what we'll be discussing on Monday is kind of how to attack both, how to not wait on either. And we may break up into smaller groups. There was discussion at our first meeting about who needs to be there that isn't there. So people are going to reach out to their communities, do some thinking about who's not in the room. We are fortunate to have 2 people with lived experience. We have a lot of people who have worked with encampments, so I feel like it is a good group, and we don't want to get too large, but we want to make sure, people who have something to add and can add value to the committee are included. So those names will be brought to Monday's meeting. And if you know anyone, if anyone else here is interested in this issue and wants to join, please feel free to reach out to me.
Questions for David or? Okay.
Can I ask one quick question of Marcus? I apologize. Marcus, did you say when coordinated entries is meeting? Do they have like a consistent set time? I missed that.
Yeah, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. We just set that this past week.
Okay, and is that every week or every other week?
Every week.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, shelter, we have a good solid group, including a couple of elected leaders and a person with lived experience. It's up to about 10 people now. Just still manageable in terms of size, and it's been fairly productive. We have decided to focus initially on touring the shelters that we currently have and transitional housing programs to make sure that we have an adequate baseline knowledge of what's in our community and what's missing. We meet on Monday afternoons at 2 o'clock generally, every week. And we had an excellent tour of the Transformation Village from ABCCM last Monday. I don't think we have a tour scheduled this week, but I think next week, hopefully we'll be looking to tour a couple of the micro shelters that are the relatively new micro shelters, and we will be moving through the community in that way. I think this is the one committee where, actually I should have thought more about this ahead of time, but I'm not sure we have a written deliverable to bring. So we are proposing, I think, to have recommendations for the HIAC to consider at least a draft of those recommendations by the May meeting in terms of, again, this is not a document, this is, a path forward to either open a new shelter or new shelters or expand existing resources in existing locations. So that's our goal, to have that by the May meeting. Any questions?
Well, I have more of it's kind of a question. Tim, you offered something on Monday that was really helpful about the difference between shelter beds and program beds. Could you lift up that differentiation? Because I think as far as what the public should hear, that's an important as we continue with the shelter work. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. No, I think as we're, doing our inventory counts, that we just need to make the distinction between, program beds and shelter beds, because there is a difference, especially if we're talking about, low barrier shelter and that sort of thing, because, I think the majority of providers in the community that do this type of service, like transitional housing, whatever, all have programs that people participate in. And, around those programs, people need to make commitments about what they want and what their goals are and, what they're looking for and that sort of thing. So, and it's a long-term commitment. So I just think that's an important distinction that we need to make, because low barrier shelter is something that's totally different from transitional housing or, the other kind of different programs that we have in the community. So I think it's really important to understand that.
Yeah, and Tim, I asked you to mention it because we kind of collectively came to the realization that the only shelter, so to say, that's in existence is these micro shelters right now, which one of them will close if they're not able to hit their $10,000-ish that they need to close out the month. And the other one is losing their building and may not function at the end. So at the end of March 31st, not to stir too much urgency, but there will only be program beds available, not shelter beds.
And just to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jane.
This was a surprise when you shared that, or somebody asked if we found somebody on the street who wanted to get into a shelter, they would have to commit to a program or else there are no beds available.
Right, and I think we're using different language around this, but this is essentially the finding that we got from the National Alliance, that, you know, we can also speak of it in terms of emergency shelter and transitional housing, but we have a lot of transitional housing programs in our community that are working with people for over a longer period of time to get them ready for housing ready in that way. And we have a very limited resources place where people can just come and spend the night, and not just have a place to sleep at night, but, you know, engage in other ways to try to move them toward housing. We need, and what we have right now, and this includes the new micro shelters, is Code Purple. That's the closest thing that we have to low barrier, high access entry. People can come in, they don't have to sign up for a program, they just have to be presenting in a safe way, so not making threats to other people, but there are no other barriers to them coming and spending the night.
Just a point of clarification that if they're winter shelters, not Code Purple shelters.
We do, I want to thank you for that. I think we have, some of them are operating as winter shelters, meaning they're open every night regardless of the temperature. And some are operating under our Code Purple model, which is, you know, only on the coldest nights. And one thing to think about going forward is whether, as an interim measure before we build and add another new shelter facility in our community, whether we could expand our winter program next year to include, to not just be Code Purple, but to be a low barrier winter shelter across the community. So that's part of the discussion that we're having. So thank you, Dustin and Tim, for fleshing that out.
And David, I appreciate you taking time to, you know, go all through that and, you know, explain it out and that sort of thing. And, you know, I think it's important to point out that, you know, just like David said just a minute ago, what we just stated here was nothing any different than what the consultants, you know, found when they, you know, came to the community and you know, did their due diligence here and whatever. So, I mean, it's just restating of what has already been put out there. So, but again, thank you, David, for that.
Right. And this is a praise fest here all of a sudden, but I want to thank you, Tim, for the time that your staff took to meet with us. It was very, very helpful, and for all of us, and especially for the elected leaders, to see what's going on at Transformation Village and to have this conversation.
Yes, and David, I want to thank you for coming and and leaving your legal pad and hat at the facility, so I can bring it out to you the next day.
Thank you for bringing my hat and my legal pad back.
Well, I'm going to end this by saying you're welcome. So.
All right, any other questions or comments?
I have a couple general questions. One, I appreciate the request of a one-sheeter report to go out with the meeting materials, because I think the work that we're doing as a community is important, and it helps to tell the story of how we got here and where we're going. I got a document from staff that gave me a better picture of what's happening in the work groups. It shows the 4 work groups. It's called HIAC Work Groups Membership. It shows when the group was established, the initial meeting, the meeting schedule, which governance, Jen, you mentioned, doesn't yet have a regular meeting time, who the chair is, who the HIAC members are, and who the non-HIAC members are. But this document wasn't with the meeting materials, so I think it's part of the missing picture of what's happening. And it'd be a great way to acknowledge the community membership that's participating. What kind of documentation are we having at these meetings? Are we doing some sort of at least audio recording or minutes. I heard there's a request for maybe staff support, but I didn't want it to just get lost in the process and in the rush.
These are work groups, not subcommittees. And we are, we're relying on the chairs to keep things organized and to come up with a deliverable at the end of the process. We are not recording them, and I don't think it would be productive to do that at this point, but it's not because we don't want to be transparent. If anybody wants to participate in one of those meetings, we can make that happen.
So the one thing that's missing then, if anyone did want to participate, is where they are. The document doesn't show how I would know where they are. Where they are isn't published anywhere. It's not even in this document. So could we do another round of maybe helping to understand? I have some understanding of where they are because I'm looking at a document that no one can see. For example, I know that coordinated entry, it says is initial meeting February 28th, meeting weekly at Wednesdays at 9, but where?
Online.
Well, that's been virtual, and I think Debbie has been very awesome about making sure that we have some meeting notes. But I don't know what every other work group is doing, but I feel like moving forward, that'll be something that Debbie and I will discuss to try and keep everybody abreast of our activities.
All work groups are meeting virtually right now, and I'm happy to include the spreadsheet that Kim mentioned in meeting materials on an ongoing basis, if that would be helpful, just as a reference. It's exactly what she described, so just a list of what the 4 work groups are, who the chair is, when the meeting schedule is, and who is on each work group.
So how would someone access a virtual meeting? For example, one of the reasons that I asked for this understanding was I wanted to see if we as city and county electeds are showing support for this work that we committed to. And I was looking to see if there were gaps. Like I can fit in and help and support any of these groups, and I would be happy to if I knew how to participate.
So we have the mayor and Jasmine Beach Ferrara on the shelter committee, and extended invitation for the tour to you and Brownie Newman. And you were otherwise occupied, but Brownie did come. I don't know if we have electeds participating in any of the other committees.
But once again, virtual links to meetings would be awesome. I could invite colleagues and peers at the county to participate if we knew what the links were.
So, for example, I walked into DSS one day and I said, it's wonderful to have a lot of information that nobody knows. And the next time I walked in, there were pamphlets about everything that they offered. Because I said I wanted it. And there it was.
I know
So we need to have this information public so that if people want to participate, they can participate. They know where it is, they can hear it, and if people want to add their input or even join these groups, they can join. Is that what you're trying to say?
All right. Staff are aware of the times of meetings. We are hoping that they're not going to become giant meetings full of a lot of discussion. We do plan to make all the information that comes out of those meetings transparent in this meeting and to provide monthly reports. If they're, and Councilman Roney, I'm glad to ask the staff to share those meeting times with you for other information. We're at 10:20, so I'm going to call the discussion and turn it over for public comment. And everybody remember that we need to be out of this room at 10:30.
I had a question for FEMA, but it was answered, so.
Okay. Any public comments? Come up to the mic.
I couldn't hear what she said. Is she going to,
Ms. Hyatt said that she had a question that she was going to ask, but it's been answered in the discussion. So any other public comments?
would comment include questions?
Yes.
Thank you all for your tremendous efforts
Pull the
in
mic
this
down.
monumental task that we have. I have a question to clarify or affirm that Elvia's question about the use of city and county properties.
I also am interested in that, and to clarify that that could possibly be used for folks that want to start their own shelter. Is that what that question was about?
Not necessarily, but just to see how many properties are available for perhaps tenancy, yes.
Okay. And also to clarify that there are a broad range of shelter types. I'm wondering if we have outlined the distinctions between all those different shelter types in the shelter work group. And I'd also like to be a part of that because I'd like a little bit more information sharing between groups so that we can all collaborate a little bit better between meetings. I know we're trying to do that here, but I feel like there's a lot more interest in questions that I have, which we don't have time for in these once-a-month meetings.
We do have a list of current beds available in the system and the type of service that they provide, and that can be, that'll be part of our deliverables going forward. And if you're asking to also participate in other work groups, let's have a conversation afterwards about
Okay.
that. I think that's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Can I chime in?
Sure.
So in addition to the shelter work group that you both just mentioned, on the housing inventory count that I talked about earlier, it will also paint that picture. It doesn't provide sort of details about programming and eligibility, but it does talk about target population and number of beds that are available and whether those beds are classified as emergency shelter or transitional housing or rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. So, so when we have that updated for this year, and we'll be presenting that to this group, that should also give us kind of a comprehensive picture of the inventory that's available in the community.
Great, thank you. I also have a question about coordinated entry and the use of the HMIS system. I'm not sure if this is true, but I may have knowledge about some shelters that don't use HMIS for security, safety reasons, and I'm wondering if that's been considered in the process, or maybe I've missed that somewhere.
No, it's being considered in the process, and that's part of the reason why I made mention of partners that we have currently, and then partners that we might have in peripheral. When we look at how we're going to make referrals, we would like to be able to eventually move towards data sharing so that we have information in HMIS about programming and who's being served. But in those off opportunities where we need to make referrals outside of the system, we would like to have some partnership and hopefully the freedom to be able to do that.
And also
Can I also add? I'm
the
sorry.
intention to maintain safety for those people seeking services.
Just for clarification for the group, that victim service providers are federally precluded from participating in HMIS for client confidentiality and safety reasons. So we're glad to have Helpmate in the room here. Glad to be working with them in coordinated entry, but don't have, by design, do not have data sharing established with victim service providers.
Okay.
Don't they have an alternative system?
And one final comment for Tim. Can you tell me how to say your last name?
Yes, it's Michael Ye.
McOye.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure I get that right. I had been invited on my exit from Transformation Village to fill out a survey. And I responded to that by noting some details for my consultation services and a price point on that. I'm wondering if you ever got that survey, because I would like to work with you as a consultant.
Okay, we can certainly, once our meeting's over today, I can give you my card and we can talk further and,
Thank you so
see
much.
what we can do there.
Roy, did you have a comment?
My name is Roy Harris, and I moved to Asheville 40 years ago, 2 weeks ago. And so I'm starting my next 40 years in Asheville. And y'all are the first meeting that I decided I would come to see what is the next 40 years gonna be like. As I walked in the room, I was looking to see who I knew from where or whatever. And this homeless issue is just Sunday afternoon, I walked out of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church and I ride public transportation. So I went home, changed some clothes, came back, went to a church service, and there was a homeless person in that church service. And they knew a church service was going on or whatever. And then I was gonna come back downtown to lock up the church, and somebody says, I'll take care of that. So I went back to public transportation, Art Station, and when I got there, it's like, okay, 5 o'clock, the last S4 bus goes down South French Broad. And I'm standing there, and there's 10 or 12 people all around me. And I'm like, who are these people? Where do they come from? And, oh, well, they're like me. The 5 o'clock bus going back down to French Broad was their ride back. And of course, the bus had a problem. The chairlift would not come down. And so the crowd started to get agitated and everything. And I asked myself, who are these people and where are they going? And it dawned on me, they were catching the S4 bus just like I was. So they may have been going to public housing and all of that as they went down the street. But I left there and I said, I'll walk home because I want to get something to eat. So I walked to the house and went to a barbecue restaurant that's on Cox Avenue. And I saw a homeless person right outside of the restaurant. So I'm saying, this is all around me. My neighborhood, public transportation. On occasion, someone is sleeping in the back door of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. And I have to make a decision as to what I'm going to do. And whether to call the cops or just gently says, you can't sleep here. But then I remembered that 20 years ago, we had steel doors on Mount Zion because people were sleeping in the doorway. And I have a homeless friend, and I asked her, I said, where did you hang out at? And she reluctantly says, the back doors of churches. And now that I think about it, for her, it was one of the most safe environments there is. I say all of that to say this. Y'all are on a good meeting. I came in here and an hour later, I figured out who you are, knowing some of you, connecting you, especially David and Kim and everybody. And then I flipped the page over and I'm like, and then you kept using the acronym. How do you pronounce it? HICA? Hi. Okay. Right. And then I saw my friend David on there, and so part of it was, I know who you are, and I know where you live.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, our meeting is adjourned. It's 10:30. Everybody, please help the city staff. They have another meeting starting at 11, so make sure we clear all of our stuff out. Thank you.